Right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to get into a post that, in my opinion, has been getting a lot of traction on the Wuthering Waves subreddit, and I've taken a look at it before. Also, in my opinion, it seems like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. It seems a little bit more doom-posty than it necessarily needs to be. Because, you know, you can kind of see from the title over here, this is quite an extreme statement to make. PSA, public service announcement. Zani shows the increasing greed of Kuro Games. 2.3 pre-release analysis by Selkie without leaks. And so what I wanted to do was take some time to break it down, see some of the points that are being made, and then actually use some actual in-game footage to determine whether or not some of the claims being made here are reasonable or maybe going a little bit overboard, especially considering the characteristics of the two characters that we're going to be talking about. Confession Phoebe and Spectro Rover, and their ability to support Zani. Before we dive on into this, I'm not making this video, I'm not making this react to spread any hate or spread any sort of or try to discredit Selkie in any way. It's just something that a lot of people in the community have seen. This is 4.3k upvotes, a bunch of rewards, and 1.3k comments. A lot of people have seen this. And so I wanted to get and set some of the facts of this matter straight. So with that, let's go ahead and get right on into it. So I guess we'll go ahead and save this one for later. We'll address that in just a bit. We'll just read the post as is and then go back up to the top to check it out after we've covered it all. Hello, my name is Selkie. I make high-level guides, quick-stop showcases, and general woo-wah content. Disclaimer, if you wish to pull for Zani, I am not stopping you. I only wish to show how her kit design impacts her gameplay and damage. Video version. I recommend watching the video. We might take a look at that one later. The problem with Zani, as you might know, Zani's kit was revealed recently, and it made a case for a prediction I've made several months ago for the game. Zani looks like an extremely strong character, and with all the stars aligned, she will likely do phenomenal amounts of damage due to the insane multipliers on Phoebe. But there is one big problem. To make it short, Zani's highest damage output at S0R1 is locked behind another limited character existing within her team that isn't Shorekeeper. So right off the bat, right, and I'm sure he's going to address this statement later, that is true for every single character in the game. That is objectively a factual statement for every single character in the game. I don't know any unit that doesn't have their highest damage potential locked behind another character. The only character that I know that's a limited 5-star that isn't locked behind a limited unit is actually Jian, because Jian's highest damage potential is locked behind a 4-star called Mortifi. But every other unit, Carlotta has Jeja, Zhang Liao has Yinlin, Chang Li has Brant has Sanhua. Actually, Brant has Sano, so he's another 4-star that benefits. Camellia has Rosia. Jinxie has Cantarella or Jeja. You can kind of see where it's going on over here. For most limited units in the game, their highest damage potential is always going to be locked behind another limited one, with Brant as well as, Jian being the only differences. So, male enjoyers, you won here with this one. Not only that, but we now have a clear case for Kuro being willing to lock Zani's damage behind completely different character signature weapons as well. In this case, Phoebe's signature. And so I can imagine this is a decent point to raise, especially considering how Phoebe's signature applies a spectral frazzle damage amp of 30%, while other sub DPS signatures don't necessarily do that. I think that's a fair point to raise. Other sub DPS signatures focus more on their personal damage as opposed to their buffing ability. But we'll get into why that's important later, because I've got some footage to show you regarding Confession Phoebe and her personal damage that might explain why she focuses so much on amplification. So we've got a nice little graphic over here of Exodia, Zani, the Forbidden One. We've got all the different pieces that you need to make her really pop. You got Zani's weapon, which gives 50% amp. You got Phoebe's weapon, which gives 30% amp. You got Phoebe herself, that's 100. And then Rover, who, I guess they don't really need to be in this team. Maybe Shorekeeper's a better person to put over here. But yeah, so yeah, credits to SlyferX for that kind of goofy thing. It's, yeah, I think Shorekeeper belongs a little bit more over here if we're looking at Zani's, Exodia, best team ever. Let's keep breaking it down. This is horrible news for anyone that is a free-to-play or low spender, because the power disparity keeps getting larger in terms of signature and character reliance. Fulfilling the conditions for maximum damage is becoming so expensive. You may wonder, why would a company that previously released fully functional and self-sufficient characters go down this path of making characters that neither function fully without specific teammates, nor will they ever reach their full damage at their own S0R1? So I think that this point over here is a little bit moot. I don't know any unit in the game that by themselves reaches their full damage potential at S0R1. I don't know a single unit in the game that reaches their full damage potential at just S0R1 without a teammate. We've already listed the examples. We have Whale Master himself, Fob Master in the chat. Kuro needs to give us negative status 4 stars and no problems IMO. We'll get into that just later, Fob. So this is the thing. Why would a company that previously released fully functional and self-sufficient characters go down this path of making characters that neither function fully without specific teammates, nor will they reach their full damage potential at their own S0R1? I think this last statement, a little bit moot. I don't know any unit in the game that doesn't fulfill those requirements. They all need a teammate to reach their full potential. The function fully piece, I can somewhat understand, right? I can somewhat understand the function fully piece because Zani, as a character, literally will not be able to use a lot of her scorching light attacks if she doesn't have spectral frazzle buildup across her team. In a similar sense, right, a comparison's been made to Jinsei, who requires coordinated attacks to gain a full forte circuit and do full damage with her beam. The argument is that, well, Zani can't do as many attacks, but Jinsei can still do her beam. Jinsei can still do her beam. And so even though the beam's gonna do no damage without coordinated attackers, the fact that she can still do her beams is what kind of makes it, you know, different. That's kind of what makes it okay. But the unfortunate thing, right, is that they essentially are functionally the same thing, where both characters, without their core teammates, are gonna end up doing less damage. They'll probably reach a threshold where they won't be able to clear without having the right teammates on their team. But when they do have the right teammates, they do a lot of damage. And Zani's way of her damage reduction without teammates is doing less attacks, but Jinsei's way of dealing less damage is literally her beam. She'll have the same number of attacks, but her beam will simply not be as good. And this is the thing, right? This is the situation. They're functionally, at the end of the day, when the goal is to make a boss's HP bar go down, it's kind of the same thing, right? Because there is an upside, right? To Zani doing less attacks. She'll gain access to her second liberation much faster because there's less blaze to burn through, less attacks that she needs to do before delivering the nuke at the end of her rotation because it's going to be shorter. So there is an upside. Her rotation is faster. She's reaching that big motion value faster than she typically would. Again, there is a trade-off over here for this. Unfortunately, I cannot explain this change in character design direction with anything else other than greed, and today I wish to provide the reasons for why I believe this is the case. So, this is the thing. And this is, I think, kind of like the big sort of issue with the complaint that's happening over here. Personal damage is a very, very important thing in these teams. Personal damage is a very, very important thing to consider when you're thinking about what role a sub DPS is playing on the roster. And this is the thing, guys. I've got footage over here from my stream earlier today of how much damage Phoebe actually does. This is confession mode Phoebe, by the way. Just showing off as a sub DPS how much damage she's gonna do. Check out this liberation cast. Boom. 29k damage. Her stats right now are 100% crit rate and 280% critical damage. That is her investment. At 100% crit rate, 2k attack, and 280% critical damage, she is outputting a 29k nuke on her liberation. This character does no personal damage at all. Their entire power budget is allocated to buffing. That is their entire power budget. It is all just allocated to buffing Spectral Frazzle and applying it. She does not do anything else. Look at how much the boss's HP bar moved from that hit. This is like basically not even having a teammate in terms of motion values. You might as well not even have Phoebe on Eternal Radiance. She should just be on Moonlit Clouds because her personal damage is so non-existent. Let's just look at what the full rotation looks like. Boom, 24k on one enhanced heavy. You only get 2 of them, by the way. You only get 2 of these in Phoebe's confession rotation. That's 24k, 8.2 3 times. And another 8.2 3 times. That is Phoebe's rotation in terms of damage. That is what you are basically a sub DPS on Eternal Radiance with, again, 2k attack, 80% crit rate that goes up to 100, and then 280% critical damage is doing. That is almost nothing. That's genuinely almost actually no damage. And this is the thing, right? You might not believe that those are the stats. This is what I was working with. This is what I was working with over here in that clear. You can clearly see this is a very high investment Phoebe. Very high investment with a lot of offensive stats, a lot of attack. She does nothing in terms of personal damage. And so it does make sense to a degree, right? Why she has so much buffing capabilities. This is with her signature, by the way. This is with her signature weapon. A limited 5-star weapon. She's outputting 29k on her liberation and then 24k on the heavy attacks. That's about 70, 80, 90k in one rotation. That's 100k maximum in a rotation on your sub DPS. People are accidentally doing 100k on a single cast of their DPS's rotation. They're accidentally dealing 100k with like a Jinxie Liberation cast or a Changli Liberation. And this is the thing. Do you want to see the damage that Spectro Rover is capable of when they're built very well? I'll show you. Spectro Rover, with a single Liberation cast, can out-damage Phoebe's entire rotation. Spectro Rover, with Eternal Radiance and Blazing Brilliance, can straight up out-damage Confession Mode Phoebe's entire rotation with just their Liberation cast. Please keep this in mind, because I do believe a lot of people, right off the bat, are underestimating just how potentially powerful the Spectro Rover and Zani team is going to be, because they're completely ignoring the personal damage involved with these two units. We're ignoring Zani's outro as well. That's true. Zani's outro gives a 20%. I'll just show you all what Zani's outro does. It amplifies Spectro damage by 20%. This amplifies Spectro damage by 20%. And so this hit by Rover should theoretically go even higher. Maybe to around 110, 120. Because that's a 20% damage amp that we're not even accounting for on the second rotation. Because Zani's got that built-in buffing. And guess what? You want to know who isn't benefiting from this? You want to know who isn't benefiting from this amplification of 20%? Phoebe, because she does no fucking damage in the first place. She does absolutely no damage in the first place. We can also see how much damage their enhanced skill is doing on Rover. It feels like it should be slight. Did you just see that 40? Did you just see that casual 40k on the spin? More. And then the final attack. Do we see these numbers? 15k, 30k. Boom. That's an unbuffed one at 88 with no Shorekeeper intro. This is what I'm saying. The damage on Spectro Rover is actually quite high. That heavy attack did 27k. Rover's heavy attack, ladies and gentlemen, did the same amount of damage as Phoebe's Liberation. He's being buffed by Phoebe's outro. Phoebe's outro buffs Rover by reducing their resistance by 10%. Zani's outro will buff Rover by amplifying his damage by 20%. I think one's going to be a bit better than the other. And so the numbers that you're seeing over here, they're actually going to be higher with Zani on the team compared to Confession Phoebe. Phoebe gives a 10% Spectro resistance reduction. Rover gets a 20% Spectro damage amp. One of them is going to be better than the other, and it's the amp. So these numbers that you're seeing here, they only get higher. And then that spin is doing 20k per slash by itself. It's quite a bit of damage, right, ladies and gentlemen? That's a lot of personal damage. And yes, this is Rover on Blazing Brilliance. True, a very optimized Rover that some might not consider free to play anymore, but it's still not Phoebe, right? And with what's it called? Emerald of Genesis, right? Some of the numbers might go down, but there's still going to be an attack buff that's factored into Emerald of Genesis. But that's the difference between these two units. The team damage itself, in my opinion, is not going to be too wide of a gap because, again, Phoebe's focusing far more on amplification effects at the full sacrifice of how much damage she's actually dealing in the teams. And that's entirely a different focus because she's amplifying. She's focusing more on buffing and stack application because that's all she can do. She literally cannot do anything else because we just saw how absolutely piss her damage actually is. How god-awful her damage actually is. On investment like this, guys, this is one of the craziest builds you can have for a sub DPS. This is one of the craziest builds you can have for a sub DPS. It's absurdly high. But Phoebe's motion values are just so low. She's basically not being factored in for her personal damage at all. So with that kind of framing, let's keep reading on into this. Let's see what else we got over here. The continuous design change of Wuwa DPS characters. I guess we're going on a bit of a history lesson with this one. Let's quickly go over the history on this. A lot of people assumed Jinsei to rely on Yinlin when she came out, but that was simply untrue, and she has many great alternatives. Just like how I think, guys, Spectro Rover is going to be a fine alternative as long as you build him for Zani. Then we had Carlotta, who relied on Jeja to reach her max potential. True, and that was the first case of a character whose biz was a limited character. What about Zhang Liao and Yinlin? Was that just not a thing? Zhang Liao with Yinlin and her 20% Electro, 25% Liberation damage buff? At the very least for me, I solved the Carlotta issue by quick swapping, so you can at least work around it with practice and player skill. This is just like a small thing, but yeah, Zhang Liao and Yinlin was definitely a thing in the game. But I do know a lot of people who felt pressured into pulling a character they didn't want just for Carlotta. You could have easily used Tao Chi or Yang Yang, and you would still easily clear all the content in the game. I have cleared with Tao Chi and Carlotta on Static Mist, and we would clear the TOA very easily with no real problems. With no real problems at all. Using that lineup on a bunch of free-to-play accounts. Yeah, Tao Chi and Static Mist, Carlotta. Absolutely no issues. After Phoebe's release, we had our very first character whose functionality was a very questionable as a standalone character. True, this is true. She relies entirely on Spectro Rover to be able to do anything at all in an efficient manner. That's 100% true. She very much relies on Spectro Rover to function as a viable character, but at least Spectro Rover was free and had very good free-to-play weapon options. Yeah, so this is the thing, right? We just talked about Spectro Rover with Zani. I still think it's gonna work. I still think it's going to be fine. That's why I'm saying this post is like a little bit Doomposty, because the way that we're wording it and the way that we're making this argument, right? We're implying that Zani is not going to be able to do the same thing. We're implying that because Phoebe's buffs are so good, we completely ignore her personal damage and lack of it completely, and we completely ignore Rover's incredible personal damage in relationship to her. We're ignoring all of that and then driving forward this whole Spectro Rover can't work with Zani, or it's like way too low in relative performance. Now with Zani, we have our first character that is severely handicapped without their best in slot partner and their signature, on top of needing her own. Just like Phoebe, she does not function as a standalone DPS without a Spectro Frazzle applier. But we said Phoebe's okay, because Rover's free, right? But on top of that, if you do not use Phoebe with her, you are losing out on up to 130% Spectro damage amplification. I can make the entire argument in a different way. If you do use Phoebe with her, Phoebe does your sub DPS will have almost no personal damage contribution. If you do use Phoebe with her, you will have almost no personal damage coming from your DPS. And so this is the thing. If we're only going to be listing the upsides of her working with Phoebe, but we're not going to list any of the downsides, that is a little bit of a stinky critique, in my opinion. Because, guys, let's be real here. This kind of damage is actually pathetic. This is the type of personal damage that we're talking about, man. We need to be able to recognize that this is just, like, not good. We need to recognize that she does way less damage than other options like Spectro Rover, and that there's going to be a big downside to running her in the teams, in that she's not going to be able to finish anything, right? You're going to go in, cast your Liberation, and be dealing less damage than Spectro Rover's heavy attack, and dealing way less damage than just the Resonance skill that's on a 6-second cooldown. This is what we're in for. With a 280% critical damage Phoebe at 10 out of 10 on every single skill. This is the damage that Confession Phoebe does. But we're only going ahead and highlighting the benefits. We're only highlighting the pros of using Phoebe. We're saying it's an absolute gigantic DPS loss. But isn't this a DPS loss as well? This is a DPS loss on the personal side. Isn't it kind of the same thing as well? It's a DPS loss that cannot be worked around as Zani's damage is typed Spectral Frazzle damage, but it can be worked around. This is the thing, that damage loss can actually be worked around because we just confirmed, ladies and gentlemen, Spectral Rover actually does do a lot of damage. They're gonna come in, right? Drop these big nukes. This is them on Eternal Radiance. They're going to drop 32k on the first hit and then 110k on the second hit. That is 140k on their total liberation. 140k damage total across their liberation. That out damages every single move in Phoebe's kit, at least when she's in confession mode. And so to say this cannot be worked around, well, it can be by making sure you do things like swap onto Rover whenever it's possible to, I don't know, let's take a look at this quick swap window over here, right? Look at this third hit where she jumps up into the air and then slams down. You could swap onto Rover during that move, launch the resonance skill, use the follow-up attack, and then swap back to Zani, and then continue her next attack chain in Inferno mode, right? We have an opportunity over here to do a swap during that big long animation move, and then uplift the team's DPS by sharing the field time that way. So yeah, again, I'm saying this post is kind of really Doomposty. So we're going to reiterate some more points. Let me repeat to you, you lose 130% damage amplification without Phoebe. True, you lose the 30% from her weapon, but let's be real here. A character with a 5-star limited weapon dealing 29k on their liberation is crazy. And so I hope they have an upside. When I'm dealing 29k with Luminous Him as my weapon, I hope that there's something else that the weapon is doing. Because we know 1,000,000% for sure Phoebe's not actually dealing any meaningful personal damage. And of course, right, we're going to have the 100% Spectral Frazzle damage amplification. We've got to make up for the team DPS somewhere. We've got to make up for the team DPS somewhere because we're doing none of it here. We're doing absolutely none of it here. Nothing at all. Her only alternative as a partner is Spectro Rover, who is lacking in Spectral Frazzle application and amplification, which will cause huge problems for Zani's functionality and damage output. They might have lower functionality for Zani's kit by allowing less blaze attacks and less damage output for Zani, but once again, guys, they can deal a lot of personal damage in their kit. They can deal a lot of personal damage in their kit, and it's way more than anything that Confession Phoebe could ever dream of. It is significantly more than anything Confession Phoebe could ever dream of. So what happens if I don't have Phoebe? Without overwhelming you with numbers and her Wikipedia essay of a kit, you just watched my video too. Here's a short summary of what happens if you don't have Phoebe. Massive DPS loss, less casual friendly rotations, you have less moves in Zani's kit. But we don't mention the upside of way more personal damage from our sub DPS. And that's the thing. I do feel like we've only been in this post representing one side of the argument. We're only looking at this 130% damage amplification and making that the full topic of the discussion. And we've kind of just brushed aside the fact that Phoebe does no fucking damage when she's in confession mode. She literally does nothing. Her damage is completely, absolutely, absurdly non-existent. And yes, 130% amp is an upside. That's very big, very huge. But she's only amping this much because she does no damage when she's on the field. She does absolutely no damage at all when she is on the field. And you cannot say the same for a fully built Spectral Rover, who will, in my honest opinion, a fully built Spectral Rover will be doing gameplay of it when Zani releases. I'm pretty sure they're gonna nuke for like 150k on their liberation. Maybe almost 150, 160k on their liberation. And that's a lot of damage. So yes, not only do you lose an unprecedented amount of damage, but now, just because you don't own a different character, Kuro is actively taking Zani's damaging moves away from you. I guess that's technically true. You could also say, well, if you do want Zani's damaging moves, you're not going to do any damage on the sub DPS that's enabling that, while also making you work way harder to achieve a worse result. I think that's just the nature of a free character or a free option versus a limited one. Yes, if you're using the free option that you don't have to pay any money for, you'll have to work harder to get the clear, and you will get a worse result. That you can say that about 5-star limited weapons. You can say that about Carlotta with Jeja versus, versus a Tao Chi or a Yang Yang. You can say that about a Jin Si with a Yan Wu instead of a Jeja and a Cantarella. You can say that about a Zhang Liao getting supported by a John Shin instead of a Yinlin. We're kind of over-exaggerating this point when that's just the nature of a gacha game with limited characters and limited weapons and all of these different mechanics. You can imagine like Chang Li only having one skill instead of two, and the only way to get the second one is by owning her best partner. I think that's a false analogy. I think most people that play Chang-Li will 100% tell you that using her kit with Brant is much better than using it with any other character. Because Brant allows her to access a unique mechanic where she swap to while she's in the air. She'll Phoenix True Sight and then immediately be able to skill. And it's much faster than doing a ground True Sight and then using her skill, right? And Brant is one of the only characters in the game that allows her permanent access to that level of quick swapping. So that's the thing, right? Brant unlocks additional functionality and smoothness in Chang-Li's kit that other characters don't actually have. So it is kind of like there. Cantarella lets Jinsei reach a full Forte circuit faster than any other character in the game because Cantarella has built-in coordinated attacks across her rotation. That's the thing, right? A lot of units have these special mechanics already that are unlocked. And in this case, it's more so built into the literal description of Zani's kit. I don't think it's the best thing ever. I've already been suggesting that a new 4-star comes out that has higher frazzle application but lower personal damage than Rover and lets you use more of Zani and less of Rover to reach a similar result. But this is the thing. I do think, again, this is a little bit needlessly negative. If that wasn't enough, Zani locks down team flexibility by needing Spectro Frazzle to function. So you're forced to use Spectro Rover if you don't have Phoebe. Well, we're kind of reiterating the point before that we made for Phoebe at the very top, but it was like, okay. I guess it was like, okay when it was Phoebe, but now it's like not okay when it's Zani. And I feel like, you know, if we're gonna have like this sort of thing going on, I feel like we can be a little bit more consistent about it. I feel like we could be a little bit more like consistent of the viewpoint of like the free-to-play option. So the conclusion over here is that this is an extremely worrying trend that severely impacts my faith and trust in the company. Okay, like okay, Selkie, we don't need to get like this melodramatic. Like, okay, like Kuro didn't commit a crime. Okay, they weren't like caught in like a scandal where they're using like child workers to design like the Chang-Li beach skin. Like, okay, it's like let's stop clutching our pearls for a second over here. It's not that deep. I perceive this monetization approach as greedy. We need to see what the actual results and comparisons are. And I guarantee you, when you see the gameplay footage of Spectro Rover nuking like 150, 160k across their liberation and completely blowing up content with the help from Zani's outro skill that gives a 20% amp, a literal 20% amp, I think it's going to be okay if Zani has less personal damage in exchange for how much damage Spectro Rover is clearly doing. And that can help make up for the lack of damage amplification and buffs that Phoebe has in comparison. Because Phoebe, again, is no fucking damage. Literally none. This is pathetic. This is pathetic for 280% critical damage. This is absurdly, ridiculously, terrifyingly bad for 280% critical damage and 2000 attack. She might as well not have any stats at all and just be a buffer at this point. Kuro is literally splitting up a character's full damage upon multiple characters and weapons and sells the character in a significantly weaker state without their best partner. If you're using Confession Phoebe, she is in the weakest state that her kit can be. There's a reason why nobody in their right mind was using Confession Phoebe prior, or even thinking about using it prior to Zani's release. Because Confession Phoebe was without a doubt the worst thing in the game. It was without a doubt the worst character in the game that had no use cases at all and was completely worthless because, again, they did no damage and they buffed a mechanic that wasn't fleshed out. And so you are just simply trading all of Phoebe's personal damage and just lumping it onto Zani and having her do everything. While with the Spectro Rover team, Rover retains far more of their personal damage, and Zani doesn't get as much, but the overall end result still be relatively competitive. And so that's why we're going to be working so hard over the next couple of days to be showing off that potential that Spectro Rover has, because I do think, especially when we don't have the numbers yet, we're in pre-release, which is when this video is being recorded, I feel like we are jumping to some really, really big conclusions without seeing how the character actually works. You know what I mean? It's quite convenient that they just happen to have a choice banner during Zani's banner for anyone that skipped Phoebe. And so people can just see how she works with Spectro Rover and then make the decision of whether or not they want to pull with Phoebe. And this is the thing. I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised by just how crazy Spectro Rover can actually be. I think they are going to be pleasantly surprised by the results. My personal stance. I wish to get a character at their full strength after I lost my 50-50, spent 210 pulls to hit pity, and get S0R1. I'm going to be honest. I feel like this is kind of... If this is what you want, if you want the character to be at their full strength at S0R1, I don't think you're going to be satisfied by any unit in the game. Because no unit in the game is at full power at just S0R1. There is no unit in the game at full power just from S0R1. Every DPS needs a partner to reach their full potential. Because that's how outro skills work. Streamer found a video with weak Phoebe. Brother, man, this is literally my footage. That's me. That's me. Your Phoebe's weak. Okay, Steely. Is this a weak Phoebe? That's a weak Phoebe? I don't think Steely has ever used a confession mode Phoebe a single time in his life. I found a video with S0 Phoebe that deals 100... You do know she has 2 modes, right? Yeah, she has a sub DPS mode that does no damage. You're probably looking at her DPS mode. Yeah. Hey, maybe look up my guide. Yeah, maybe look up my guide and you might understand where this conversation is going. Alright, so with that, the mere fact that I have to do the same thing again just to have access to a different character's full damage output is insane to me. I mean, this, again, it's been like this since the start of the game, to be honest. Especially if this happens to be a common trend. It has been a common trend. Spending up to 420 pulls for every new main DPS to have their full damage is not something I and many others can afford in the long term. This is the thing, right? It's for every character in the game. It's not enough. If you want the best damage possible in Jinxi's team, you need to pull Cantarella and Cantarella's weapon. Because, guess what? The personal damage from the other teammate that you have is counted in the team's damage. And so if you want to have the best performance for a DPS character, you need to pull the sub DPS character and the sub DPS's weapon, because the sub DPS's damage is counted as well. And again, the fact that we never mention personal damage is kind of like where the situation just gets a little bit sticky. You have to do that for every character to reach the full damage potential. But the thing is, the full damage potential is never actually required to get even close to clearing any of the content in the game. He's saying it puts us in a vulnerable spot for power creep, HP inflation, or simply not being able to play what we want. But at least he recognizes that at this moment in time, we have no relevant HP inflation or power creep to talk of, so it won't be an immediate issue. However, that doesn't mean it can't become an issue in the future. This is the thing, Selkie. A meteor could come down and blow up this planet at any point. Does that mean that I should make decisions in the present, knowing that a meteor could come down and just blow up this planet at any point? And so I should never save money? I should never plan for the future? I should never do XYZ? Because I could just get blown up within the next 30 seconds. So I should just live in the present and never worry about anything. I don't think there's necessarily a point in talking about HP inflation or power creep as a potential issue when there have been absolutely no signs at all pointing to their potential existence. It's like, again, Kuro Games could just get hacked by a massive virus that deletes everybody's character data. Yeah, this is like the multiversal timeline that Fob was like talking about the other time. Yeah, if Kuro Games was actually the first one to become big in the gacha space, they would have actually been the ones that, they would have been as greedy as Hoyoverse. We'll never know. We'll never know. Just like we can't really ever know if there is going to be power creep because there have been no signs. There have been no signs at all pointing to its potential addition to the game. When we have a release like Cantarella, who just was not good, like not a meta character on release, and we had Jeja, not a meta character either, and then they become better, but they're still not broken. It's just, we can clearly see these devs know how to balance their game and aren't using character strength as a cornerstone for selling units. So yeah, I think this entire thing is a bit of a moot point to get into, at least in my opinion. Now we got the counter argument. Some people may make a necessity counter argument, which basically entails, we don't need the extra damage, to which I will say, then why are they taking it from us? Well, you don't have all the extra damage because you're not using the limited 5-star character, but you still have plenty of damage, don't worry. You still have plenty of damage. Again, this is a 140, 150k Spectro Rover liberation. That will probably be increased when Zani is released, because I'm not using anybody here that's out of the ordinary on this team. The answer is obvious: to sell more characters and weapon, which no one can deny. I think we're really getting into some theory crafting over here. Because when Jian, a 1.0 character, is absolutely destroying the current middle tower in the TOA, and you can just use his 1.0 team of Jian, Verita, and Mortefi and be crushing this content with absolutely, with the same exact rotations and the same exact builds that you had in 1.0, then, I mean, we're like theory crafting problems that don't actually exist. There has also been a very suspicious trend going on where the DPS gain of the first and second sequences have been getting higher and higher over time. Chang Li just sucks ass on her sequence nodes. This is one of the worst examples we could have chosen, because we know 1,000,000% Chang Li's sequence nodes aren't good. This is a cherry-picked example. I'm gonna be real here. Chang Li's S6 is the worst in the game. She literally has the worst sequence nodes in the game out of every single unit. And to compare them, right, to a character that has way better ones, right? It's just, this is the thing, right? Why didn't we use Jinxi's? Right? Like, if we were gonna use somebody's, why did we choose Chang Li specifically? This is the thing. There's a reason why we chose Chang Li specifically. You guys want to see what Jinxi's boost is? That's 115% on S1. And so yeah, 119 to 115. But guess what? Jinxi goes from 40k DPS to 45. Cantarella's S2 is still less damage than Jinxi's S1. Guys, you want to look at the actual DPS number as well? You could also just look at that too. 45k, Cantarella's barely hitting 40. And so this is the thing, right? Chang Li's sequence nodes suck. And we pulled up Cantarella, who's a sub DPS, that gains a big damage buff because she is a sub DPS. And that's the thing. She's not doing a lot of damage at a baseline. Pull up Jian. Everyone knows that Jian and Yinlin don't have good nodes. And this is the thing. There is no content in the game that requires S2s. I don't even know why we're getting into S2s and like sequence nodes. There's no content in the game that requires them, that even gets close to them. If we're talking about the recent characters being broken, what happens then when we look at Phoebe? Did we not want to bring up this one? This was dog shit. Actually dog shit. It's worse than everybody else we saw. 9% on S1? What about Rosia? Why did we put Rosia? 110% at S2. Yeah. So, this is the thing. Aren't we getting a little bit Doomposty over here? Isn't this example a little bit cherry-picked? This is why I think this whole sequence node point is so moot. It seems so unnecessary. It seems like really like aimed just to like drive more like negative discussion about like the whole like greed and monetization, when there's absolutely no need for a single sequence node to absolutely demolish all the content in the game, with plenty of time to spare in all of the time-limited content. There's no content in the game that requires this. If you were talking about HSR, I'd get your point. If you were talking about HSR and their Eidolons, I'd get your point. Because for a lot of characters, it can feel necessary to pull Eidolons just to clear the content in the first place. But in Wuwa, it's not even close. In Genshin, yeah, pulling sequence nodes, 1,000,000%. Pulling constellations, yep. But in this game, I don't see it. A lot of people don't see it. And so to bring up this point over here, it just seems really moot. But yes, in the current state of the game, you do not need Zani's maximized damage to clear anything. But once again, that doesn't mean this will always be the case. And again, the Earth could be struck by a meteor in the next 3 minutes. The Earth's core could just get blown up from an internal explosion. And so we could adjust our decision making based off of that, or we just see when stuff happens and then react to it. I don't understand why we need to have this worry and say that, like, oh, this is something that we have to, like, always keep top of mind that's going to happen, when it's been a year since the launch of the game, and Jian is still demolishing content. Jian is still demolishing content, just like he demolished content on release. In fact, Jian has only gotten buffed since release, with the introduction of things like Shorekeeper, Nightmare Echoes, and potentially an arrow team with Kachona and Rover in the future, because we know that they're buffing arrow damage. Like, all of that is out there, all of that is ready to go, all of that is something that's potentially going to happen, right? And Jian is, for all intents and purposes, he's only going to get stronger as time goes on and we get more refinements of that weapon. So my recommendation is, for this reason, I recommend to tread forward with caution. These design choices are far more than alarming, and I wish to make people aware of the free-to-play and low-spender unfriendly direction. I don't think we can really make that take yet until we see the actual results and the actual numbers. And from seeing how absolutely pathetic the damage output of Confession Mode Phoebe is, let's just see it again. Boom! Right after seeing how pathetic this damage is, and seeing how high Rover's is in comparison. And it's like we've only looked at the positives of Confession Phoebe. We haven't addressed a single one of her downsides at all. And we haven't talked about a single upside to using Spectro Rover to drive this argument. And I do think you're preying a little bit, Selkie, on people simply not understanding the dynamics of the game and the trade-offs between these two units. And I feel like as somebody who is so much more informative, who has all of this knowledge, who has like this technical background when it comes to the game and the experience playing it at high levels, I feel like you really needed to be more well balanced with the point of view that you were bringing to this discussion, instead of only highlighting the negatives of Rover and the positives of Phoebe, when you know that there's a lot more depth to that discussion. I really hope that we can stop Kuro from going further down this path. I do not feel comfortable with being pressured into pulling everything, so don't. Just so whatever character I want to play will do appropriate amounts of damage. We don't know what is considered appropriate yet. This would be a fine thing to say if Spectro Rover is Spectro Rover and Zani is unplayable and can't clear any content. We can't say something like this and be like right until we know what the actual performance levels are and the results are. That's all I really wanted to say. Enjoy your Zani pulls and have a good one. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. I will not answer anything that I consider leaked information, but I'll try my best to help. So let's just take a look at the note at the top that we said we were going to get to. Important edit. It seems that a lot of people have made the assumption that I'm implying that Zani needs Phoebe or Zani is unplayable without Phoebe. Both of these statements are wrong, and I never said anything along those lines. She just loses a lot of damage, and her rotations are harder without Phoebe. That's all. And Phoebe loses a lot of damage for going Confession, and Rover does a lot more damage. Again, right, we're still, even with the edit, we're not talking about any of those major points. Please don't spread the misinformation that she needs Phoebe to be functional. If losses in performance I illustrated do not matter to you, then she is completely fine with Spectro Rover and will probably clear endgame just fine. And again, we don't mention that Spectro Rover does like almost 2 to 3 times more damage than Confession Phoebe does in a rotation. And because they do almost 2 to 3 times more damage, then they're going to get much more benefit from this buffing outro skill. Phoebe benefits almost nothing at all from this amp. Almost literally nothing at all from this amp. Basically non-existent on her, but Spectro Rover eats with this thing. So yeah, I think we've addressed the entire thing. Like I mentioned before, I really found this post to be really doomposty. And I'm personally a little bit concerned for why it's, you know, gotten so many upvotes and become like such a big part of the discussion when all we've talked about are the negatives of the situation and then none of like the actual trade-offs or the downsides. And I do know how negativity works, right? It's really going to dominate the discussion. It's a lot easier to focus on negativity compared to positivity. But I'm going to be real here, right? We didn't talk about this at all. We just started going crazy over 130% damage amp and blaze buildup and threw everything out the window when it came to this entire discussion. And so hopefully I've been able to paint a different point of view on this entire situation. I know there's been a lot of drama going around regarding the synergy of these two units, but at the end of the day, I do think there needs to be a bit more of a well-balanced perspective on the entire thing, and hopefully we were able to bring that. Let me know what you all think. Peace.